Happy you're joining to this session of the State of Systemic Investing. Now we're currently just admitting everyone so that we start the session all set and all together. Hello, Ana, Arturo, nice to see you here. Perfect. Okay, well, we're going to start while others continue to join. As mentioned, welcome to this presentation on the state of systemic investing. We're happy to be here, Josh Colchester, as well as myself, as part of the SI core team that not only made our research on what is systemic investing, but we also did a systemic investing lab where we organized 3 sessions where we wanted to learn further what is systemic investing, not only in theory, but also in practice. And for this reason, we were also very happy to have co-hosts of the systemic investing lab, Cesar Esquinca and as well Tanuja Prasad, that as part of the SI social and SI environmental, SI finance hubs, helped us to host these sessions and to learn further what the systemic investing means in practice. And well, as mentioned, we are now here, just Colchester and myself, in order to tell you more about what is systemic investing and to show as well some theoretical and practical gaps that we're missing ahead. Who is SI? I guess many of you already know, but it is an online platform to connect people around the world to learn and apply ideas and methods of systems innovation. It is a network finding ways to unlock systemic potential with a community of people interested in doing so. Myself, I'm Eva Valencia. I'm part of the core team of SI and of the SI Environment Hub representative. And I'm very interested in ways to co-create with actions for systemic change. And together here, Josh, I don't know, you want to briefly just present yourself and then we continue?
Great, thanks, Eva. Yeah, good to see everyone. We still have people joining. Yeah, great to be able to share this with you. I guess it's the first time we've done this state of systemic investing. We actually have one on the state of systems innovation, but it's great to bring it down to systemic investing. So it's very much a work in progress and something we're experimenting with. But the lab went really well. Hopefully some of you were there for that. We had some really good conversations. Hopefully we'll be able to share some of that with you today. And hopefully you'll get some kind of insight into this emerging field and what's going on and some of the challenges. Look forward to actually having a conversation with you people as we go along in terms of your questions and comments and so forth. So it's just 1 hour. It's going to be quite quick. I'll hand it back to Eva.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's going to be just an hour in which during these first 10 minutes, we're going to give us some quick introductions that we just did, and then a brief icebreaker for everyone that is here interested in systemic investing to reflect a bit upon that. Then we're going to have a 45 minutes paper presentation in which we're going to share for 5 minutes or so about the results on the paper, but then you're also going to have a space to ask questions and reflections on these topics. And finally, we're going to give some conclusions and invitations for other events, other events and other actions that we're doing as part of systems innovation to continue these forward. Why are we then here? To share the research of the state of systemic investing and to learn from you. So now we have this mural board that just already shared in the chat, and we want to ask you, now that we are on this topic, what is systemic investing for you and why do you think it's important? So if you can add a post-it here, you just put it here, and if you can add your comments on this, that would be great. We'll have just 4 minutes in order to exchange upon this. If someone cannot add on the mural board, please also you can write it in the chat, and we're happy to include it in here. Okay, I start to see some people writing already. We see some ideas here. So investing in leverage points, so it has systemic impact. In another comment, we also see again leverage points, but understanding how are leverage points found in the financial sphere. Question. Yes, we will hear more about this very soon. Feel free to just add whatever you know. You, of course, this is not a complete definition, just the thoughts of what is systemic investing for you and what do you think it's relevant. Gabrieli also mentions here in the chat, intersecting multi-sector expertise to fix wicked challenges. Great. So thank you for your comments. As you saw, there is a lot of mentioning of the leverage points. So it is about how to address wicked challenges and how to do something with the leverage points in order to create some actions. Below here in the Miro board, you will find some references from the paper that we have used, and also some resources in this. If you are interested in seeing and learning more about it, you will have it there. Well, now we're going to start with the presentation. And the first question that we wanted to address as part of the paper is, in fact, what is systemic investing? We are seeing that this is a concept that is being replicated in different academic and non-academic papers and also in practice. But what does it mean? Well, in order to analyze what does systemic investing means, as mentioned, we did a literature review on different of the papers that were out there, not only theory, but also in practice. And we did a systemic investing lab that together with different experts on these emerging fields, we learned more. What did it mean? What are the theoretical and practical gaps, but also knowledge of how to develop this. Why did we do this? Because the current ways in which we're addressing how to face the challenges out there in the world, we're trying to make single best solution cases. However, as you all know, the problems out there are wicked and complex, and there are different factors, causalities between them. So how can we invest better in a way that it also addresses this complexity of our problems? In particular, then, what does it entail to create an investing system that creates, counts, and measures for progress in a complex manner that accounts for different types of value, not only economic value, but potentially also social, environmental value, different types of assets as well, and also different types of stakeholders. Is it only private, the ones that are investors, or are there also other types of investors? So for this reason, we focus on systemic investing as it is a growing field that aims to target beyond investments in a single and best delivery solutions. It tries to understand how can we better create these interactions and flow as part of the systems in order to go beyond single and best delivery solutions, to invest in the systems as a whole. This is not easy. So how do we do that? Well, in order to analyze this, what we learned from this paper, and we stated it there, are some of the opportunities, challenges, and future areas of systemic investing research and work. We divided it in 3 parts. First, to understand better what is systemic investing. Then, what are the actors and factors that are affecting the systemic investing field? And finally, what are potential intervention areas and leverage points to unlock systemic investing further? For this, we wanted to then, at the beginning, describe what systemic investing is, then what are the actors already doing in practice, and finally, find some further work that can be yet done in order to unlock systemic investing potential. So what is systemic investing? What did we find? There is a definition that is currently being replicated in different papers that describes it as an emerging approach to capital deployment that seeks to transform systems to produce the best long-term outcomes for people and planet. What can we see in this definition? Three main things. What is it? It is an innovative approach for investments. Why? It is not only about economic capital, but also about environmental and social outcomes of the systems that we want, now that we're dealing with this polycrisis and all these risks that we're facing around the world. And how? Thinking long-term and in transformations, not thinking only in particular points, but in the systems as a whole. What is the difference between systemic investing and other types of investing? Well, there are four main differences. First, what you're investing in. Rather than just a single solution, you invest in a whole portfolio of projects. What is the duration of the investment? There are very short investments currently, and the long-term investments now say that they're described to be up to 3 years. In systemic investing, and due to the literature also on what systemic change needs, this investment can be 5, 10, even 25 years duration. What are your investment options? In traditional investment, generally, you choose the best financial mechanism in order to invest in something. However, in systemic investing, the idea is to combine different types of financial mechanisms that better address the challenges that you're facing. And what are the risks of your investment? Well, there is a big opportunity there, as currently traditional investment analyzes only the risks that they see in a particular place. However, in systemic investing, the idea is that also these risks dissipates, and you understand the risk from other points of the system, and you distribute them. What are the methodologies that are used for systemic investing? There are different organizations that, as the name mentions, use different systemic methodologies in order to develop systemic investing processes, such as transition maps, systemic challenges analysis, causal loop analysis, solution space mapping. And they bind it together with different financial mechanisms. Some of the ones that have been mostly used by different organizations have been blended finance, income share, equity, steward ownership, supply chain financing, and venture debt, which are finance mechanisms that also allow a more diverse approach for investing. There are already also some principles for systemic investing. All of this, we're just now giving a bit of information on all of this, and you will be able to read more if you're interested through the references and the paper as well later. But well, yes, what are the principles for systemic investing that have been found? There are 4 moments in which investments are developed, which are goal setting, investment strategy, investment process, and sharing and learning. There is then these 12 systemic investing principles that support a bigger perspective and a more complex perspective that go through the long term, for example, from the goal setting through the portfolio strategies that we had already mentioned also before. In the investment process, how can you create these cooperation between different stakeholders, and finally in sharing and learning, how do you share and then also gain from the experiences from the previous investments? And finally, what drives systemic investing? Well, as you've seen, it's mainly from the learning from 2 fields. On the one side, from the learnings from the financial field, and also from the systemic field. So as you see, it's how can the different actors, methodologies, and purposes of these 2 fields be put together. Let's pause. And yes, we have some space now that you have questions on what is systemic investing, and also comments. a proposal for question is also what we need then to do systemic investing in practice. What do you see? And just please, if you can have some opinion of what you've seen, and then also
Sure.
speak more in this conversation.
Yeah, no, that was a great start. I'll just say, kind of broader context, I think there seems to be a big uptake in kind of interest around this at the moment. We know, I guess we'll get more to kind of actors who are working in this space, but you may have heard of Transcap, for example. They started a number of years ago, but it seems to be in the past year that there's been a lot of kind of talk about, and even the past 6 months, a lot of talk about systemic investing. They did a conference here in London earlier in the year, and a lot of organizations now, as we'll see as we move on to the next step. I don't want to, preempt that, but it's just to give that context that it seems to be quite a moment for systemic investing in terms of the interest that's coming into this space. I'll just say that. So then speak to the points that you have there, Eva. One that was really jumping out at me was traditional finance and investing is, we might say, quite egocentric in the sense of what's coming back to me, right? We're investing for a return on that investment. And I think the kind of paradigm shift here, a fundamental conceptual and values kind of shift is what's in it for the system kind of investing, right? It's not like what's coming back to us. Maybe that's part of it because we want to be able to reinvest and so forth. But it's more starting from an ecosystem perspective that we're operating in a broader system. And you pointed there about wanting, outcomes for that system that are beneficial for that system. So that's kind of, I think, an initial kind of paradigm shift, moving from this egocentric kind of system that we know very well to an ecosystem kind of foundations to what we're doing in terms of the values, in terms of the mental models, in terms of the awareness of the systems that we're operating in. And as soon as you make that shift, everything looks different. I mean, there's more to it than just that. But I think that reframing in and of itself, everything starts to look a bit different in terms of how we go about investment. And it becomes a lot more complex, fortunately or unfortunately. And that's part of the challenge that I think people are struggling with at this time, because it becomes a lot more multidimensional, right? When we look for return on investment, a financial return, well, we're generally just concerned with money, right? How's that going to be invested and how's it going to come back to us? When we look at the system, we recognize that money is just one part of this ecosystem of value and different things that need to come into play for this system to function better and for systems change to happen. So it becomes a kind of multi-value equation, a lot more complex, bring in many more different things, recognizing that finance is not the only thing. It has to interplay with many other things, and it has to work synergistically with many other things. And of course, this shift away from single point solutions to this kind of portfolio network of interventions across different dimensions that are going to work synergistically to actually try and shift this system. So you do have to do the systems mapping to understand, what's going on. And that's what we see, Transcap and others kind of starting with the systems mapping to understand what's going on in this food system, what's going on in this city or whatever it is. And then, as we talked about, these leverage points, where are those intervention points? How can we apply the capital effectively at those intervention points to start working synergistically and start, realizing the emergence of a new system? So that was, I think one initial kind of takeaway, this shift to ecosystem thinking, which inevitably leads to this multi-dimensional kind of view of the system and different value flows and different things that have to develop and grow, become interconnected, and be working synergistically for finance to really be an enabler of systems change.
Yes, thank you. There's very much, and precisely this idea also of return of investment. What does that mean in a more systemic perspective of the world? Because it's not only about going one way, but going different ways. So how do we create this synergies and leverage point? And how do we account for all these different stakeholders? Thank you very much for sharing these on systemic investing. I don't know if someone else would like to add as well from this conversation. Okay, well, So we have questions here. Which kind of quality indicators reconcile short and long-term impact expectations, embracing risk-taking? And we have another question in the chat. How do you convince stakeholders and finance of the value of social entrepreneurship in the context? Many social challenges are behavioral, which is challenging to measure.
I could speak to that one actually.
Please.
It's something I've considered as I've become interested in this field of investing, systemic investing, is the fact that you need something to invest in, and you need something that's productive and generative to invest in. And I think that those are going to look like social enterprises in some sense, right? We put our money into something that's kind of business as usual and, operating upon industrial age logic, it's probably just going to get us business as usual. We need real investment vehicles that are, those vehicles themselves, these enterprises, social enterprises, are generating value for the system, have positive externalities and so forth. So I think it's the other side of the equation that isn't really often talked about enough. We focus on the investing, but the investing's got to go into new initiatives and new enterprises and social enterprises, and we've got to get that working and match those. So how do you convince stakeholders in finance of the value of social entrepreneurship? I think if you switch to this kind of paradigm of systemic investing and systems change, then it's easier to make that kind of connection within the traditional logic. Social enterprise don't look very good, right? They aren't going to make you a lot of money. And they're not going to get you that return on investment. So I think maybe shifting to that new paradigm and then making that connection between systemic investment, systems change, and social entrepreneurship can go a long way.
Okay, just Cesar, do you want to add something as well?
Thanks. Yeah, just to complement a little bit what Just shared. I think a lot has to do with how social entrepreneurship is defined in relation to, let's call them traditional financial investors, right? And how, going back to what Matthias mentioned as well, in terms of the different types of value that are necessary for systemic investment, how there are other types of profit, right? So traditional angel investors or impact investing firms, they're focused on financial return, and they see social return as a secondary item, right? Where it's all of these types of value, social, ecological, and financial, they should have, or they have, in at least a similar base of profit. They should be valued as they all bring profit in different ways. And there's even more the perspective that if you think, for example, there's this theory of metabolic returns, right? If you invest in a forest, the metabolic returns, if they age, they grow, right? So its ecological value tends to have higher returns or higher profit if it ages, right? So this kind of shift in how you understand value, it's a type of shift in narrative that I think it's useful and important to have if you're thinking about social enterprises, because at the end, all enterprises right now or in the future should incorporate social, ecological, and financial value.
Yes, I will. Yes, I fully agree. I think now even we call them externalities, right? In our current economic system, social and environmental assets are externalities, but at the same time, we're now seeing these polycrises, great social and environmental risks that are internally affecting the our economics. So I think that's also a way. It's not only because we're nice people that are interested in this, but it's a need. It's part of the system. It's part of the system that is changing what is happening in our societies. So I think that's also a way to convince them. And what types of quantity and quality indicators? I think that depends on the topic that you're addressing. How do you scope your system, and what elements do you include at your system? What are the elements, and what does it mean for them to evolve over time? Okay, due to time, we're going to continue, but please leave them here. And if there is more conversations and comments, even yourselves, you can add on top of it, please. So now, speaking about stakeholders and speaking about other, how do we speak with the current traditional investing field? Who is there and who is interested as being part of the systemic investing new emerging fields? Well, we did some analysis. The first challenge was, what is the systemic investing ecosystem? And what we found is that there are two levels in which you can map the system. One is the global level, and at the global level, there are mainly financial actors, systemic actors, and then people that are specializing in this connection between these two sectors. And those are now currently driving these emerging fields. And also, there are other people that are interested in systems and or in finance. So this combination of actors are the ones that are part of the systemic investing system. That can be a global level, but then if you choose a particular system in a different context, then that will look like specific actors in your place. You can see here as part of the mirror board this imagery showing the different types of general actors that we found in the ecosystem that can be adapted from global to local levels. And in here, we also added some of the names of the organizations that we see that are currently driving these fields. If you're interested in learning more about them, you have the links here as well. We wanted to give you a bit of a spoiler of who these organizations were. And in here, you can also see the results of the Systemic Investing Lab, where we talked about the actors of this ecosystem further, but not only about the actors, but also about the factors that are affecting these fields. How did we map the factors of this field? Well, which are the interactions between the actors driving this? For example, religion and traditions, knowledge infrastructures, loans, and as you can see, so it's how are these three types of actors having some interactions between them. What were our conclusions about this? Well, currently, there are mainly financial and academic actors in the systemic investing field. These players may be some consultants or some universities giving some technical expertise that they already have on systems thinking, but that they have also knowledge on these financial fields, and they advise investors on how can they create better investing decisions with a systemic perspective. We added here some of the organizations that are currently working. What are the factors then driving currently the systemic investing ecosystem? Well, on the one side, it's those financial structures that have a systemic thought, such as portfolios of investment, risk perception, risk aversion mechanisms, data management practice, return of investment capital models, and some diverse financial instruments. What are some of the factors from the systemic sector that are driving the field? The understanding of these different types of values and assets, the knowledge infrastructures that are now currently being co-created, co-designed in order to facilitate learning and collaboration for investment in this case. Actionable knowledge translation of what is systems for finance, human-centered design workshops, and also ways to create feedback learnings and adaptability. Those are the general factors that are currently driving the field. There are some particular ones that are not necessarily from the systemic field or from financial field, which are, as Jos was saying before, also about mental models. How do we challenge these competition versus collaboration paradigms? How do we challenge these understanding of leverage points, and what are different types of value, for example, as well? And well, so then what can we do about this? How can we further unlock the systemic investing potential? That's what we're going to see in the next part of the presentation. but before that, also, we're going to make a little post. And I would like to ask Joss also, what do you think then, just to put this systemic investing in practice with all this complexity of actors?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's many more that we haven't found that are kind of working in systemic ways, but don't necessarily call themselves that. And there's the whole, someone put in the chat there that the Nasdaq are already doing SDGs and so forth, and then you've got impact investing, and even though they're not specifically here, there's intersections, and some of those are thinking non-systemically, some of them are thinking systemically. So there's a lot of complexity there, and of course there's people being attracted into the field also. So this is a dynamic situation, I would say. And our little schema there of a few organizations is far from complete, but I think it captures some of the key ones. As you know, Transcap is really trying to build this field, so they're quite core to it. But we had some of these organizations part of the lab, right? Deep Transitions Lab. Twist also here in the UK are doing a lot of work. And of course at MIT, sustainability initiative around working a lot with Transcap, so they're kind of interconnected too. So different organizations there. I guess I just wanted to pick up on one point from last time actually and bring it into here is about it was just a realization that traditional investment is about investing for a return on investment. But if we're talking about systemic investment, we probably shouldn't just be talking about investment. We should probably be talking about de-investment, because we know a lot of that needs to happen, right? If we really want better systems, it's not just investing in the new, it's de-investing in the old, right? It creates two systems. Innovation has two sides to the equation. It's not just innovation where we're creating and investing in the new. We have to actually let the incumbent we have to let go of those industrial age systems that we know we're still heavily investing in. So I'd love to see an organization here that was actually in the business of de-investment, right? Instead of, I think if I listen to Transcap and most of these, I find a lot of it's talking about investment and not so much about de-investment. So I'd love to hear more of that. It was just a thought off the top of my head. And then I think we're going to get into it now when we talk about gaps and so forth. But it's this thing about tools and the need for tools and so forth. But I think I'll hold that and maybe let other people say a word.
Thank you, Jos. Cesar, please. You also raise your hand.
Thank you, Jos. That's a great point on the sort of the investing and perhaps reinvesting in other types of systems. I just wanted to make an important clarification with, I feel, vocabulary and precision. I think we often confuse certain concepts and relate them to system thinking and systems approach, but they can be approached in a systemic perspective, but by definition, they are not. One of them is the SDGs, for example. The SDGs are very linear in their thinking. And for example, exactly sort of like these NASDAQ milestone makers, it's also very linear in the logic, like solving some of the world's biggest problems goes against the systemic logic that we're trying to propose, which again, it's important for me to have this precision, because if we are going to approach this type of systemic perspectives and invest in really in systemic investing, we need to be precise about this.
Yeah, just to say a quick word before I pass it on there. But yes, the thing about naming, isn't it? So like some of the things that call themselves systemic investing are probably not, and some of the things that don't call themselves probably are. So there's a bit of nuance there. That's all. But maybe I'll pass it on to Juan.
Yeah, no, just one thing that for me always jumps out when we're talking about systemic investing is that I feel there's a really deep under exploration of risk as a whole, um and I think just like a lack of recognition that it's not, I mean, it's a financial architecture question as well. I mean, our finance, the way the architecture works, development banks, rating agencies, they really overvalue certain things by design, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to move into actually making systemic investing a reality until those parts of the equation change. And in particular, just like risk analysis for sovereigns in the global south in general is really poorly done. And it creates a dynamic where it's really impossible to get money flowing, even for traditional projects, let alone for systemically minded ones, until we can actually tackle, I think, a lot of those barriers. And a lot of them really do have to do with not just like a return or like increasing valuations, but actually how are we assessing risk? What is actually what gets through pipelines of due diligence? And how can project portfolios actually work to mitigate it? But right now, I mean, the risk tools that are available are incredibly poor to be able to do any of this. And so I think that that's one of my fundamental concerns, is that we're always looking at the allocation side of things, but not at the process end of it. And that's always going to leave us, I think, pretty frustrated where things are going, because I mean, unless the risk paradigm shift, yeah, it's going to be really difficult to get capital flow.
Yeah, I might pick up on that briefly before we move on. I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of broken feedback loops here when you're taking the system as a whole, the environmental, we talk about these externalities, which kind of equate to broken feedback loops. And I think one of them you're pointing out there, that the analysts and who actually maybe pays the price for all this stuff at the end of the day may be very different things, right? And it's okay. They get caught in a logic of reductionism and analysis, and it all makes sense in that context, and they do their job. But when the real systemic risks, right? We really struggle with the idea of systemic risk and quantifying that and capturing that. We know those aren't really being captured, So I think there's kind of a broken feedback loop there when it comes to systemic risk and who pays the price for that, So I think that's a big part of the equation. But let's dig on.
Yes, and also who is risk for, right? I think also when doing the risk analysis, it means what does risk entail? Who is observing that risk, or how can we distribute that risk? And I think that would be also an opportunity even for systemic investing. So let's continue with the third part. So now that we have seen some of the definitions of systemic investing, as well as some of the actors and factors that are driving it, what is still needed to be done? What can we further unlock systemic investing potential? Well, from the learnings of our work, we decided to divide it into 5 different types of interventions that we can do in market, policy, scientific, infrastructure, and cultural interventions, mainly based also on a theory called multi-level perspective as well, which tries to encompass the different types of interventions that different actors can do. And from all the work that we did in the Systemic Investing Lab, what we learned about it. So about the market interventions, what did the results of the webinar showed? What do we need to do? Well, further, how do we engage investors? Who are these different investors? How can we orchestrate different activities with them? And how can we create awareness of what are the different types of value and of these systemic challenges? At the same time, it's improving financial mechanisms. Our current financial mechanisms are made for just finding what is the best solution. So how can we create more diverse multi-capital investments that can be allowing different types of incomes, different types of flows, of different types of values? How can we recognize those, and how can we drive diversity in the diffusion of these different types of investments? And finally, also building different capabilities in businesses, as Jess was saying, what tools are there for us to know what investments can we do if we're working systemically, so that it doesn't get too complex, so that it's still manageable. Regarding policy interventions, we found that, of course, currently the regulations are focused on traditional investing. So how can we develop new standards that allow and even incentivize investing that has a systemic lens? How can we redirect subsidies so that it's more diverse? That it also allows for there to be more research and development of what are the types of investment seeds and investment opportunities in the different systems, and also choosing directionality. How can we acknowledge potential normative and political routes to strengthen investments when systems are moving in different directions? These are the general intervention points that can further be worked upon, but there were also some specific intervention points depending on each of the systems that we're working in. Then also about infrastructure interventions. What is needed? Well, on the one side, to prove the standardization of systemic investing. So it's not only about policies, but it's also about legal standards, voluntary standards. How can we create other types of international property structures, such as Creative Commons, that allow for different types of investments that benefit more people, more organizations, that allow these synergies? Establish frameworks and methodologies for systemic investing. There is one of the papers developed by MIT Sustainability Initiative is starting to develop process in order to develop systemic investing. But how can we learn from this process? How can we improve it? And infrastructures for cooperatives and alliances of businesses. There are some organizations that already have more systemic ways to organize themselves. So how can we create infrastructure so that they are also more easily developed and planned? Regarding nature interventions, develop regulations that protect nature, legal frameworks that also recognize nature as an element of our systems, building alliances and pooling funds to conserve nature, better prices for nature, and enhance environmental governance. How can we recognize the environmental resources and who is going to represent them in order for them to be a particular structure in the system where there can be investing back and forth. And finally, cultural interventions. So there is a need to change mindsets from competitive to collaborative industries, finding which are the synergies, but also which are the conflictual or contradictive interests from where we're going, from where we're investing. Then also strengthening relational awareness. Not only how can we create consciousness in investors and people that are implementing these investments so that they also see the wider system they're being part of and its opportunities and risks, and also building new educational curricula. Currently, the ways that investing in finance sector is done is not systemic, so how can we develop new business curricula? And finally, scientific interventions. So as you saw, there is a lot of organizations now that are having expertise and developing expertise in systemic investing. So how can we integrate this systemic research, not only to understand the systems, but to really make it a decision, support for decision-making processes? How can we translate the concepts in the best way? How can we commercialize systemic research for portfolio investment? How can we support different research centers that are maybe global or local and develop participatory work in order to work with the current actors in the system that are doing the investing decisions? So yes, so those are some of the topics that there are still that there needs work to be done still in both theory and practice. And now, again, I would like to start the conversation to hear what are your thoughts on this. Where do you think that we should start? Where should we start? Of course, thinking in system is not only the only place, but how can we develop this further? Maybe in a particular system, for example, in agri-food and health, we heard throughout the systemic investing lab that there is a lot of potential because there is already complex challenges. What else did you see? Yes, if you can also start the conversation.
Sure. I mean, I guess what I've noted over the course of doing this lab is that there's still a need for a kind of accessible toolkit for all of this, isn't there? It's complex, and we're still in pretty early days for it, but for it to really be successful, it can't be overwhelmingly complex for people when they want to go about doing it. But also that there's so many different stakeholders that are related to and working in relation to finance. So it's not just this little cohort we saw back there of kind of diehard people who are doing systemic investing. It's of course the whole financials, all the people working in finance. And how do you actually get more broad systems thinking amongst those, even if they're never going to be, real systemic investors? Getting greater awareness across that system would definitely help. But then there's so many people who interface with that system. Even a business has finance that it has to manage, and in that sense forms part of this system. And how can they be a positive contributor to this? So a toolkit could not just help these people who are really, at the center of trying to do systemic investing, but also a wide variety of actors who interface with this, for example, in insurance or sovereign wealth or whatever it is, who can actually start to align better with making all this happen. So I think it's just looking, more broadly at the kind of complexity here, and that this is, broadly across the system, both for these specific actors, more broadly, for people who are working in finance. Different actors need to understand how they can be part of this and contribute to this in different ways, and the pathway into that and the tools for them to do that. So I think that's still a kind of work in progress in terms of how do we create that toolkit that makes it accessible for people, not just to make sense of what this is about and how it relates to them with their different roles, but how to actually engage with it in terms of their relationship to finance and how they're engaged in the system. Yeah.
Yes, I think also this idea of multi-capital. What is capital? Experiential capital, knowledge capital, natural capital. So how can all these investors of these different types of capital can really work together, and how can we involve them, even if they're not called investors as such? No. Thank you, Jess. I don't know if someone else would like to add something. Yeah, you were going to say something.
No, maybe we just pass on to pick up some questions. So we have one from Gatwiri. Do you want to maybe read it out for us?
Yeah. So because I know these wicked challenges are so many. So how about we deep dive into nature interventions, because that's a common goal for everyone in the global world, because we're seeing a lot of climate change issues. So what do you guys think?
By natural interventions, you mean kind of nature-based solutions?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one approach. It's one way of addressing it, isn't it? Maybe Eva, you have something to say on this?
Nature-based solutions are very important, but indeed, as I think, as part of a systemic perspective, there are different types of interventions that we have to address. So some of them have to be purely natural. Some of them will be natural and social, such as urban farms, for example. So I think we have to see the different types of challenges and then address them with investing rather than focus on the solution. I think we have to focus on the challenge and then from there see what are the different types of investing and solutions that we need in order to address those. But I think, we need them as well. Also,
I think
very important.
It also speaks to the need for, a proper accounting system, this full value, full cost of accounting system. If you don't have that in place, well, you're going to systematically undervalue these nature-based solutions, these natural ecosystems, and degrade them, and that's going to lead to crisis and so forth. So I think all across the board, you see the need for actual proper full cost accounting system before this is really going to work, or else you're still doing it in kind of a piecemeal way. You're again, creating your own problems by undervaluing things and not setting up the right kind of accounting system. So I think, we know that's a huge challenge to get that kind of proper accounting system instead of the narrow one we have. But I think that speaks a lot to what you're saying, because out of that emerges much better nature-based solutions. Ecosystems become resilient when you don't chop them down and so forth and destroy them, because you account for them and you value them and so forth. Maybe I'll pass it on. Anna, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, Eva, thanks for the overview. It's really nice to see and to have the feeling that we are taking part of emerging fields, and that's more characterized by open questions than closed questions, right? What I see, I'm from Brazil, so what I see is to create a shift, a paradigm shift. We are talking about a new glossary, right? But to bridge that, I think we have to recognize what is the mainstream glossary and demands right now, and everybody's talking about carbon capturing. So maybe if this is the issue, and it's all we are talking about here in Brazil because of COP30 that is coming on, and different kind of financial mechanisms, tropical forest fund forever, for example. So all this money is going to carbon capturing, which is the current KPI. So what if we embrace that glossary or that demand and think about transversal supply chains that are really that really contributes to the carbon emissions, like construction or fashion or waste or healthcare, and start by doing that, articulating stakeholders, because it's a cultural shift. It depends on people mindset. So we have to have bold leadership to start this conversation and give the example, as the example that I put in the chat with Belterra. I had a chance to speak with the CEO, and it's so different that for us from Occidental mindset to think on 20 years by now, we are not used to that. So how can we think as like cathedral builders, and not that we are not going to see what we are building right now in our lifetime? It's really difficult for us with our colonized and Occidental mindset to think about in this long term, because we are probably, I'm not going to see, but I have my kids, I have my beliefs, I have the certainty that we have to change, and that what depends on us. I think it's to lead by example and start communicating better. That's all I see in this. We have Rio Climate Week right now. It's in all the forums that I go to. I hear that the crisis is not climate, it's not an environmental crisis, it's basically a communication crisis. So how can we communicate this need?
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're getting to that we can swap out the real thing for, carbon capturing kind of accounting, and then everybody thinks that they should do that. So yes, I think for whenever something new comes that's challenging and so forth, the industry will present a kind of an alternative that looks like the real thing, and to kind of have something to do, I guess, and to avoid making the real difficult challenges. But yeah, Eva.
Yes, well, due to time, we're going to have to go to the last part. But Juan, do you want to say something very briefly? I know that you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, one of the questions I think that are going to be also really tricky is like, it's just a mandate question with investors. Like they work under very strict parameters, and so unless investment committees and governance structures fundamentally change, it's going to be very difficult to see where their roles is. I mean, I used to work at a development bank. We did a lot of blended finance transactions, so I interacted with a lot of them, and I still do. And their mandate hasn't fundamentally changed, even if they have new KPIs. And this is the same for development banks, by the way. Like, their climate and biodiversity goals are very much a more of a definitional question than an actual impact one. And so that
Yes.
implies a lot of difficulty in trying to transition things.
Yes. Thank you, Juan. And yes, now I think that's a very good connection to the last part. So future possibilities and challenges. So as you saw, systemic investing is an emerging field, and there are already several organizations and people interested in finding ways to create new multi-capital investing mechanisms based on the premise of this complexity world that we are living in and that is affecting both globally and also locally. There is currently a whole set of different actors from a lot of them from financial and academic sectors that are interested in how to develop this further. However, there is a need for also other types of actors to say what are the opportunities and challenges of achieving this, and to create alternative interventions, to create these tools, financial mechanisms, systemic translations in order to know how can we really develop systemic investing in practice, so that it's not just an ideal, but it's also, it has a process, and different types of investors, even if they're not called investors, can also participate in this. So there are some gaps, as you saw, theoretically, how, what is it? There's a desirability and feasibility of systemic investing. Practically, who and how can orchestrate these types of systemic investing processes, and how can we do so? There is already a research agenda that you can look further. It's already as part of the references. And yes, we would like to, and there is also practical gaps. That's the one I was looking for. I'm looking for the viability. So there is like this graph here that shows from traditional investing to systemic investing. And so this is the practical gap. How can we achieve this? How do we test things differently in order to do so? And with this, thank you very much for being part of this. I would like now to give the floor to Joss, so that he gives final information of what is systems innovation doing.
Yeah, great.
Thanks. Challenges.
Yeah, thanks for leading the conversation, Eva, and all the work of hosting the lab and compiling this. Caesar just dropped the link to the guide in the chat, and there's a lot more in that, and you'll be able to see those organizations that Eva was talking about, and other resources at the end, links and so forth. So thanks a lot for joining, everyone. We're going to try and end on time today. Just share a few little things at SI that relate to this. We are developing a ongoing systemic investing lab to kind of explore this challenge as we go forwards. For example, there's questions around what's the systemic business model that we might actually invest in, or this question of de-investing, or other ones like that enable us to stay working on this, and also think about portfolios and how might we actually do this in practice. So we're kind of going in that direction at SI. We welcome you to join that group. We'll keep you posted. You'll learn more information there. You can see also on the second link here is about our labs, like this one that Eva is running over the past month or so. We run other ones. If you have ideas for challenges you'd like to collaborate on addressing and running a lab with us, we welcome that. Just send us a message on the site, but the link there would explain to you what a lab is. There's actually a guide there you can take away. You could even run your own lab as you wish. A template you'll find on the website there. So just a little bit of feedback, how you found the session today. Was it useful? Was it what you were expecting? Love to get that. Up here is very useful. Down here is not useful at all. Just drag a dot. And any comments or feedback would be much appreciated. It was a short 1 hour, but I think it was a great conversation. And okay, we've got a 10 out of 10 from Gatwiri. Thank you very much. And let's draw to a close. We will continue this conversation in the future and look forward to seeing you then.